Hello there and welcome to Folk-a-Dilly Tales. Every week we will be here to tell you some crazy stories, some amazing poems, accompanied by some fantastic songs. My name is John Hales and I will be your host. We have an incredible war story for you as Chris Richardson tells us the tale of the Flower of Dunkirk.
This story reminds me of the time that I used to live in Japan. And I had a good Japanese friend there, and he once told me that the Japanese people like to be flexible and to cover all bases. He told me once that often a Japanese person might have a Buddhist birthing ceremony, a white Christian wedding, and then follow it all up by a Shinto funeral. Well, this story is about Lesley Flower. And he liked to cover all bases as well, for he was enrolled in the RAF. He liked to mess about in boats like the Navy, and he saved the life of many a soldier from the army. Now Lesley, he had always been interested in boats. He was always pottering around, always doing something in them, and he joined the Merchant Marine. And as the 30s were coming to a conclusion and it looked as though war was going to be inevitable, those that knew him thought, surely it's a given that he's going to join the Navy. But he was based in Crete for a short while, and there he met with a bunch of young RAF officers. And I don't know whether or not it was they had a better officers' mess. Perhaps the pay was better, or perhaps the uniform just was more attractive to the ladies. But Lesley decided that he was going to join the RAF, not as an aircrew or a pilot, but as part of their Marine Corps. For in the RAF, there needed to be somebody that would take the boats out to tend to the seaplanes in harbour, or to pick up those pilots that unfortunately had bailed out into the sea. And so, the early part of the war was just that for Lesley. And he slowly began to go up the ramps and became a corporal coxswain they called it then. And he was in charge of his own boat, and he would be out on anti-sabotage operations or tending those seaplanes. And in fact, the earliest mention of him was when he took a boat out one stormy night in Dover, and he secured several of the seaplanes that were otherwise being damaged by the waves. But this story really begins on the 29th of May, 1940. It was late in the evening. Operation Dynamo, the great evacuation of the British Expeditionary Forces from Dunkirk, was in full swing. And Lesley, he received a phone call from the group captain in charge of the RAF Marine Corps.
Flowers, my good chap, are you busy this evening?
Lesley knew, of course, that whether or not he was busy or not, orders were coming.
No, I'm here, sir. What do you need?
Well, get your crew together and meet in Dover for 2 a.m. and wait for further orders.
Yes, sir.
So Corporal Coxswain Lesley Flower took his boat and met 4 other boats in the harbour that night. And they were given orders by the Navy that were there. They were to make their way across as part of the small ships flotilla, across to Dunkirk to ferry soldiers from the shores onto the waiting destroyers so that they could be brought home. Flowers took the commanding Navy officer inside and he said,
Sir, you do know that these boats are not suitable for this. They're not built for any operations that will take us directly to the shore. They'll go aground, and they'll damage the hulls, and probably the motors as well.
Corporal, needs must tonight, and you'll just have to follow orders. You'll just have to worry about those damn boats later.
And so Flower and the other boats made their way out that night. The sea state was high, there was a swell, and the plan had been that one of the destroyers was going to tow the 4 boats close to the French coast. But alas, the sea stake was too high, and it was determined that the boats would have to make their own way across. And 2 of those boats foundered in the waves. Fortunately, the crews were evacuated, but it only left Flowers and 1 other boat to make their way to the shore. Fortunately, the German Luftwaffe was far too much concentrating on the beach itself, and there was little opposition to him in the water. And so time and time again they would beach on the shore, pick up soldiers and ferry them out to the destroyers.
Come on, mate. Let's get you on board.
But as predicted, it was hard on those boats. And each time they landed, there was a terrible scraping sound, and Flowers could feel the boat shudder.
Watch out, watch out! We've grounded!
By the end of that morning, it was clear that the boats could go on no further. The water was beginning to leak through the hull. And so they were taken on board the destroyer, and the boats were towed back behind them. Now, Flowers might have realistically thought this was the end of his time in the evacuation, but he was determined that if there was a need, he would be ready, and so he took the boat back, and with the other members of his crew, they began to repair it and make sure that it was fit for purpose. And sure enough, 2 days later, on the Sunday, again there was another phone call. Again, he was ordered to report to Dover, and when he was there, he was taken aside by the commanding naval officer and said,
"We've got the bulk of the Expeditionary Army off the beaches, but now the rear guard remains, and we owe it to these men who have fought so hard to give their brothers the opportunity to get away. We must do our very best to get them out. But time is short, and the German army draws closer. The only way we are going to get them out in time is if we can dock the destroyers directly at the quayside. And to do that, we need berthing parties. People like you with the expertise of getting these destroyers up against the dock. You and the other boat will both take a berthing party across to Dunkirk. We will then be able to load the men onto the destroyers. But be aware, the Luftwaffe are about, and you will be made a target."
And sure enough, as Flowers took the boat across, the sea was still high, the sea was still a problem, and in fact, the second of those boats, because it was so crowded with the 12 men of the berthing party as well as the 3-man crew, it took on water and it sank.
And overboard!
Oh, help! Help! Help me! Help! Flowers wanted to stop to try to pick up those that were in the water, but he knew that if he did, the whole mission would fail. And so he promised to his colleagues in the water, he said, "I will get the message across to the Navy and they will be out to pick you up." So he made his way back to the beaches of Dunkirk. And true enough, this time the Luftwaffe were out in force. They were bombing the ships in the harbour, and 2 Stukas, 2 German dive bombers, saw this small boat coming across, and they dived. And Flowers pulled out a Lewis gun that he'd taken out of army stores before he came. And he started firing up at the dive bombers as they came down. And the bombers missed. The bombs, they straddled the boat took on water, but there was little damage. But then the bombers, they turned around again. And this time when they dived, they strafed with machine gun fire across the stern of the boat. They shattered the rudder, they damaged the engine, and as they turned round again, Flower continued to fire. And whether or not it was his accurate fire, or just they had decided that it was better to try to find easier targets elsewhere. This time the bombers turned around and didn't come back. But still the danger wasn't over, because the boat was now stationary in heavy seas, and Flowers knew that if he wasn't careful the boat would soon be swamped. So in best Blue Peter fashion, he looked around the boat for what he could get, whether or not it be a piece of old pipe, a piece of rag, possibly even a pair of Val's own knickers herself. But whatever it was, he managed to lash that rudder back together, and he managed to kick that motor back into action. And they made their way across the intervening water, and they landed that berthing party. And that berthing party brought in the destroyers, and the destroyers were able to take away the remains of the rear guard. But Flower knew that he still had one job he needed to do. He spoke to the naval officer about those people that had foundered in the first boat.
Sir, I have to go back. I need to save the others.
And he finally got permission to take the boat back to that last known position and search for survivors. But although he did, when he got there he could find no one.
Hello? Hello? Is anybody out there?
And when he finally made his way back to Dover, he found that actually only one of that crew had survived the cold waters that night. Flower found himself in the thick of wherever the RAF flew over water in the rest of the war. Slowly he made his way up the ranks. And still he was in the RAF when the war finished, and he found himself in the rank of group captain. And as that role, he thought about those times he'd had with those flimsy wooden boats during the war. And he proposed a new design for boat and was more seaworthy.
Yes, I like that. That's safe.
And it was adopted by the RAF. And now they had a boat that was a much safer way of gathering up those RAF men that had been forced to bail out into the water. And when finally he retired in good standing. Now, how do we know this story? Surely there is some memorial to him somewhere. Somewhere there's perhaps a book or even a film. No, nothing at all. And so it was by luck that Mario and Lesley happened to be at Flixton Air Museum, and there in a display case they found a poem by then Flight Sgt Lesley Flower. And after finding the poem, Lesley and Mario searched the internet and they found the transcript of an auction where his son had put up his father's medals for auction to benefit the RAF Benevolent Fund. And amongst those medals were this story, but also there was a silver cigarette case, engraved not only with that old boat that he had taken across to Dunkirk, but also with that newer style of boat that he had designed and that had benefited many RAF personnel in years to come. And also there was a caricature and a picture of the officers' mess with signatures on all of them. And finally there were letters from aircrew and pilots that he had saved from a watery death. So I think those that needed to know knew, and those that needed to remember remembered. And I brought that poem along today, that poem that started this journey. And so this is it, Brothers by Flight Sgt Lesley Flower. I know that I'm slow, the old fellow replied, and I'm often a crushing old bore. But I once helped to salvage our nation's pride, brought low on an enemy shore. Of course there were thousands of others who had rallied to rescue their kin. For in those days, it seemed we were brothers, and as brothers it seemed we would win. And later I sailed with a mighty host, with the greatest armada of all, and I shared in the fear as the moment drew near to assault that impregnable wall. But of course, there were thousands of others who'd returned to regain what we'd lost. So we shared in our triumphs like brothers, and like brothers we shared in the cost. And now that the fighting has ended, and the things that we fought for are won, we are surely entitled to let down our hair and abandon our good selves to fun. But of course, there were thousands of others whose lives are forever impaired. Let's spare them a thought. They're our brothers. Let's remind them at least that we cared.
And his memories came with the
Next week, The Merman of Orford.
He closed his eyes and held her by his side, her sweet soft sigh sent shivers down his spine. She kissed his face and listened to his heartbeat race.
Folk-a-Dilly Tales is a Zingaro Blue production. It was written, produced and edited by Mario and Lesley Price. Mixed by Frank Erlenkämper. The poems, lyrics and songs are also written by Mario and Lesley Price. My name is John Hales and I've been your host. Our storyteller this week was Chris Richardson. Additional voices by Mario Price and John Hales. The contents of this podcast are based on the book Folk Stories, Legends and Poems by Mario and Lesley Price and are available as a book and an e-book from Amazon under the name Folk Stories, Legends and Poems. The music can be found under that same name and as volumes 1 and 2 streaming on all major platforms. Today's background music was supplied by Scott Buckley. You can find the link to these compositions in the comments below. Be sure to check out our music videos that tell some of our stories on YouTube. For more information about Zingaro Blue, visit our website at www.zingaroblue.co.uk or find additional links in the comments section. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please hit the follow button so that you can listen to the next episode of Folk-a-Dilly Tales. Thanks for listening.